Prime Minister Netanyahu warns of a very severe response if Iran attacks Israel. This comes as rumors swirl around the upcoming meeting between him and President Trump. Is the Prime Minister planning to present plans for a second Iran offensive? And how will the President react as isolationists tighten their grip on MAGA? Israel Undiplomatic starts now. Shalom and welcome to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic. I'm Mark Regev, the host in Jerusalem, and my co-host Ruthie Bloom is in New York City, where she's been there for her father's funeral and Shiva. Ruthie, I hope you're doing well.
Well, thank you, Mark. Yes, I am. And then we can talk about that. In a way, it's related to our topic today because of Netanyahu's upcoming meeting with President Trump at Mar-a-Lago. And since apparently the main topic is Iran, and that was really my father's pet peeve for the last several decades. So it really does tie it in. I was happy that he lived to see Israel bomb Iran and the United States join in with the B-2 bombers. Thank God he lived to see that. But he lived a full life. He's almost 96 years old. But it is interesting, I must say, during the Shiva to see American Jews and hear a lot of their perspectives, just some of which were surprising to me.
Well, you're, of course, 100% right when you talk about the Iranian issue, which is clearly front and center when Netanyahu meets Trump at Mar-a-Lago. It's clear that there's unfinished business. Now, when President Trump was here and spoke to the Knesset in the middle of October, just after the Gaza ceasefire deal was signed, and we'll discuss that later because that's another issue, of course, on the table when the two leaders meet. But he said clearly if the Iranians start to reinstitute their nuclear program, they can expect a further strike on them, and he was leaving it a bit vague whether that would be an Israeli strike supported by the United States or whether America would join in as well, as they did last time. But he was very clear in his message to the Iranians on the nuclear program that if they do try to rebuild their nukes, if they do try to rebuild their military nuclear program, then they can expect a strike. But where it's not clear to me, Ruthie, is the issue which is of great concern is ballistic missiles. Because we saw in the 12-day war that we went through in the middle of the year that Iranians' conventional weapons can do great damage to cities across Israel, many fatalities. There's not an easy answer. We can shoot down many of these missiles before they land and explode in Israel, but unfortunately too many still get through. And you can still walk around Tel Aviv today, as you know, as a resident of Tel Aviv, and you can still see buildings damaged by the Iranian missiles. And for Israel, if they reconstitute their ballistic missile program, that's also a clear red line, as has been stated by the government of Israel. Do you think Washington shares that concern, or is President Trump only concerned about the nuclear issue?
I think that President Trump can be persuaded that that's a crucial issue. I think one of the problems with this administration is that though President Trump and certain members of administration have been extremely understanding of Israel's predicament and understanding that it's not only Israel's. We even heard Ambassador Mike Huckabee a few days ago at the INSS conference in Tel Aviv saying that he was saying that this is a danger to Europe, to the world. It's not just to Israel. And anybody who doesn't, he said something like Europeans who don't understand that are stupid. I think he used that literal word. So yes, but we have another wing of the administration, people also whispering in President Trump's ear. And that's what I call the Tucker Carlson wing, or, J.D. Vance, the vice president. He's much more of an isolationist. I've said this before. He is somebody who is trying not to alienate anybody in the Republican Party, including the real bad guys there. some of whom are out and out anti-Semites. And he's trying not to alienate them because he has his eye on the presidential primary in 3 years. So he's trying to sort of be wink at both sides, and that doesn't work in a situation like this. I also would like to remind you, when you said about the ballistic missiles, first of all, Hezbollah in Lebanon has also said, Iran, you got to resupply us. This isn't only Iran. Iran is the head of the snake, and we did severely weaken it. And also financially, Iran is in really bad shape. However, it would spend its last penny on trying to assert its hegemony in the region and the world, rather than feed its people. And that's a big danger. But also Israelis were tired of running to bomb shelters, living in bomb shelters when there were these missile attacks, particularly from Iran. And, it's hard we can't go back to that.
So there's an issue here which is priorities, yes? If you're Israel, Iran is enemy number one. It's the most important threat. And as you said very correctly, Ruthie, Iran is the sponsor of other smaller threats, whether it's Hezbollah or the Houthis or Hamas, yes? But the head of the snake, so to speak, is in Tehran, and that's how Israel sees it. And Israel doesn't like the idea of Iran using its this period of relative quiet, to rebuild its capabilities. And there's a question here, America, and it doesn't matter to a certain extent who sits in the White House, though obviously it's very consequential who sits in the White House, but on this it doesn't change anything. America is a global power with global interests, and they worry about China, and they worry about Russia, and they also worry about Iran. And the extent that Iran's ballistic missile program, when it's taken away from the nuclear program, just with conventional explosives, which we saw the damage they did in Tel Aviv and in other cities across Israel and the fatalities they took, is Israel going to sit down idly and allow them to rebuild their non-nuclear military capabilities? And Israel has been clear, we won't. But once again, I'm still not convinced, or I'm not sure that the Americans are on the same page when it comes to the conventional threat from Iran. It's clear. Once again, the president was unequivocal when he talked about the nuclear threat. But I'm just not sure. And this is one of the issues, among others, that I think has to be discussed between the two leaders at Mar-a-Lago.
Oh, absolutely. But, this is also one of the jobs that ambassadors do. And the Israel's ambassador to the U.S., Yechiel Leiter, really, one of his jobs is to convey the message from Jerusalem to Washington about Israel's concerns. And because he's so articulate and he really does know how to present Israel's position, if anybody can impress upon, it's not just Trump specifically, it's not only the president, it's Congress, it's the people around the president. I think that he's a really good person to do it. Obviously, Netanyahu is the key person to do it, but we're talking about along the way and not just when he goes for his meeting at Mar-a-Lago. Now, a lot of this, we have to point out, is just speculation. And one of the reasons that we're speculating so much and trying to do, damage control, I would say, is because Axios and this its writer, its Israeli writer, Barak Ravid, spends a lot of time publishing stories that claim Trump has had it with Bibi. He's angry at Israel and he's going to give him a dressing down when it comes to Washington. And, we kind of laugh at that because every time there's such a report, the U.S. and Israel are on the same page about all kinds of very important military operations, including the last time when the U.S. joined Israel's strike on Iran, but not merely the others. So, there's a lot of joking going around like, well, as soon as Axios says that the Trump administration is finished with Israel, we know that a big operation is in the wings and is in the works.
So I'd now go to Syria, and is there a possibility that there's also maybe Israel and the U.S. are not on the same page on Syria? We saw the Syrian president Ashara. He was recently in the White House, the first time in decades that a Syrian, I think maybe even the first time ever, that a Syrian head of state was hosted by the president. We saw the president speak to him very affectionately and praising him. He had said that, he's a good-looking guy, I think he said, or an attractive man, I think he said. He talked about him being a tough guy but needed in a tough neighborhood. He gave him a present. He gave a present for his wife, perfume and so forth. And the body language was very warm. Now, Israel is very suspect of this Syrian leader. That's why we've moved our forces into southern Syria. That's why we took out in the days after he took control of Damascus, we basically eliminated the Syrian military because we were afraid of that military forming into his hand, and for good reason, because this man has a record as a jihadist. I mean, he grew up in Al-Qaeda, ISIS sort of area, and now he wants us all to believe that he's a changed man. And President Trump gives the impression that he thinks he may be a changed man. So is this another area where the Israeli Prime Minister and the American President are going to differ?
Well, there, I think Israel and America are not on the same page, not where Syria is concerned and not where Turkey is concerned. But you mentioned Syria. So, for example, American troops were killed in Syria, and Trump said, that's it, and we're retaliating, and he did. But here is where there's a discrepancy. According to reports in Israel, there are various reports, but according to some reports, the terrorists who killed the U.S. troops were actually part of Ashara's Syrian forces that are not part of the forces that are trying to reach kind of peaceful Syrian government. So if they were part of Ashara's government forces, and Trump is trying to obfuscate that or doesn't know that and believes that, oh no, they're only Al-Qaeda, they're opposition forces, then that's very bad. Now, we don't know for certain, but I trust, I have to say, I trust the Israeli reports that this attack was not merely from oppositionist forces in Syria. So that's one problem, because if Trump is so enamored of Ashara, who really hasn't, I don't believe he's changed his stripes. And I know you always say we all are, we base our policies on interests. And I think, the jury is still really out on the interest, on whether we have shared interests with Ashara. And, so far, I don't think so. And with Turkey, for certain, we don't. Turkey is a bad actor. And President Trump is always saying, they're our friends, and Turkey wants to step up and take a role in post-war Gaza. And the only thing that really, I would say, is saving us from that impossible, let's say, eventuality is the fact that nobody wants the international force, the so-called international force, nobody wants to really step up to that plate, except, of course, Turkey, because Turkey has ill will towards Israel, wants to do something. So we're very nervous about post-war Gaza, and we still don't have the body of Ron Gvili, the last dead hostage, still in Gaza. By the way, we knew that was going to happen when it got down to the last hostage that had to be returned. We knew that Hamas would hold on to him or her.
So you're right in bringing up Gaza, which is also an important issue. Everyone's talking about moving to stage 2 of the Trump peace plan. Obviously, that's contingent on releasing the hostage, but that could happen anytime soon. The question is, the Americans just in the last few days released their plan for the future of Gaza. I think they call it Sunrise, and Gaza is going to be this marvelous place with high tech and a smart economy and prosperity. It'll be, to use the old cliche, it'll really be the Singapore of the Middle East, or the Dubai of the Levant, yes? But having said that, a lot of Israelis are very cynical. And the bottom line is this: the ceasefire from Israel's perspective is based on Hamas disarming and no longer ruling. In other words, they lose their military and political control over the Gaza Strip. And the Gaza Strip is demilitarized. That's the bottom line for Israel. That's why we agreed to the ceasefire agreement. It's part of the 20 Trump points. Gaza is demilitarized. Hamas is no longer in effective power over the Gaza Strip, no longer in political control, and they are disarmed. Hamas is disarmed. They were Israel's war aims from the very beginning of the war, and we were very, very pleased to see that Trump included them in their ceasefire arrangements. Now, it's clear Hamas is trying to weasel out. Yes, Hamas does not want to disarm. What terrorist group wants to voluntarily give up its arms? I don't think there are any. But we have to see pressure on Hamas, continued pressure. That could mean Israeli military pressure. That could mean diplomatic pressure from Hamas's best friends in the Sunni Arab world, which is Qatar and Turkey. But at the moment, the jury's out on if this is working or not. Now, should I be worried, Ruthie? And I'll ask you the following question. When Hamas spoke to the American people earlier this week, last week, in his national broadcast, he talks about bringing peace to the Middle East, right? And in many ways, I mean, he bought the ceasefire agreement, but it's clear in Gaza it's not over. And to what extent is Trump there ready to stay the course? In what extent is he happy he got the deal and now is moving on? And yet the pieces are still very much in flow there in Gaza. We're not sure what's going to happen. If Hamas refuses to disarm, we're back to square one. That means maybe a renewed Israeli military operation. If the Americans don't successfully use Qatar and Turkey like they did in the past to put pressure on Hamas to do the right thing, then we can say, kiss goodbye the chances of Hamas voluntarily demilitarizing, which will force Israel then to return to the military pressure on Hamas that we were doing before the ceasefire came in. I mean, do you think Israel and the United States are on the same page on this issue?
No, I'm very concerned about that because the two countries, we are on the same page, sort of in theory, all right? Yes, Hamas has to disarm. Hamas is not disarming. Hamas has to be disarmed, has to be defeated, has to be killed. The fact that Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff are already, there's already sort of music going on in the background, according to which, well, we can live with Hamas still in Gaza in some fashion. Maybe they'll be in a separate part of Gaza. There's all kinds of ridiculous fantasies. It's not that the U.S. is on Hamas's side. No, that's not what I'm trying to say. But it's like, we want this fantasy. We want to have this, Riviera of the Middle East in Gaza. And unfortunately, the terrorists are screwing up our fantasy. So let's adjust it. All right, that happens a lot in international relations, particularly with Westerners who just believe that everybody just wants to get along and have peace. And you just mentioned again, Qatar and Turkey, you have to pressure them. Mark, Qatar is Hamas. Turkey is Hamas. Turkey wants Israel wiped off the map. So you're talking about mediators and people who are supposed to do this who are on the side of the enemy. So, and even Egypt, with which we have a long-standing peace treaty. Egypt has become and is acting like a hostile member of this whole situation. Says, no, we don't want to, we're not meeting with the Israelis, as though we don't have a peace treaty with them. So I'm very skeptical about all of this. And unfortunately, I have to say, Israelis, here's a big problem. When you don't have an October 7th or some major horrific thing, like in Australia, the Bondi Beach terrorist attack, when there's a dramatic event, some people say, they mean business. We've got to do something. As soon as it calms down a little bit, as we saw recently, and with Trump's 20-point plan, and yes, Israel really did weaken all the enemies in the region, everyone sort of calms down and forgets that the threat is still there.
I'd like to respond, Ruthie, by saying the following with your permission. Number one, as much as the relationship with Egypt can be challenging at times, the peace treaty has been there for getting close to half a century now, and that's a good thing, right? It's the peace between Israel and Egypt is very important for Israel's security. It's important for Egypt, and I think both sides have an interest in keeping that peace treaty. It was the first peace treaty between Israel and an Arab country. And so far, with all the problems, with all the ups and downs, it has stood the test of time. And just a few days ago, Israel announced this gas deal with Egypt. We're selling them Israeli gas. Who would have thought that the Jewish state would become an energy exporter to an Arab country? Well, it's happened. And it's happening to the major benefit of Egypt, who's getting good gas and cheaper gas. And it's a good benefit for Israel because we're selling it. And it's building an economic relationship between the two countries, which I hope will also strengthen the other relationships. A good economic relationship can often form the basis of a stronger bilateral relationship. On the issue of Turkey, and you say Turkey is Hamas or something to the sort. I mean, I've got no illusions about the Turks, but I think it's wrong to see Turkey as Hamas. Turkey is headed by someone from the Muslim Brotherhood sort of world outlook. He's obviously no friend of the Jewish people or of Israel. He's been known to say anti-Semitic things. But I think he's more interested in neo-Ottoman empire building than he is about Hamas. Hamas is a tool for him. Hamas is an ally, but I make a distinction between Turkey and Hamas. The best example is just before October 7th, the president of Israel made an official visit to Turkey, and they rolled out the red carpet, and everyone was making nice, and that couldn't happen if they were Hamas. Once again, I don't deny that they can be a threat. I don't deny they can be an adversary, but they're not exactly Hamas. I think that's incorrect. But we have to discuss, before we finish, one more thing. We haven't discussed Lebanon. And there was all this talk from Washington as well, that Hezbollah has to be disarmed by the 31st of December, by the end of this year. And we're getting very close to the end of the year. And so far, though Hezbollah's military power has been significantly mitigated by Israeli military strikes, the Lebanese government was supposed to do follow through. They were supposed to demilitarize the remainder, yes, the residual Hezbollah force. That has not happened. And Hezbollah remains an armed force, remains a threat, a lesser threat, but it wants to be in a position where it can make some sort of minor threat and rebuild its potential. And we're moving now to the end of the year. Israel, of course, continues to strike against Hezbollah targets when need be in Lebanon. But the question is, where is Trump on this issue? Once again, is he now not looking at Lebanon? Because without pressure on the Lebanese government, without Israeli military pressure on Hezbollah, they're not going to follow through on disarming Hezbollah. It's obviously difficult for them to do. They're not going to do it, the Lebanese government, unless they're under pressure from America and others to do so, and to do so now.
No, absolutely. So what we have to see is how much President Trump remembers that or is reminded of those things by the people around him, because he's been extremely solid throughout. But, he's erratic, and every once in a while he says something that makes us nervous. But as long as he doesn't prevent Israel from doing what it needs to do, that's already important for Israel. It's not that we expect America to do the work for Israel, but we really need America not to threaten us or prevent us from doing what needs to be done. And as you said, we have been playing whack-a-mole in Lebanon and Gaza because all of this disarming hasn't happened. It's like we have this mini war of attrition going on, and we don't want to do it. We don't want to have to keep fighting, but we're going to have to because, and even from Egypt, drones going over from Egypt, everywhere you look, there's terrorist activity being rebuilt and being carried out. And they know what they're doing, okay? Because Hezbollah was basically defeated. But it's enough to have its little barbarian terrorists pop out of this tunnel, that tunnel, rearm a little bit to make us have to take them out. We take them out. It looks like we're the aggressors. It's part of the terrorist plan. Where they can't defeat Israel militarily, they do it on the international stage. They do it by playing the victim, etc. So that's what worries me. But I do have hope that this meeting in Mar-a-Lago, if it indeed takes place, because I think President Trump said that he something like, he hopes it's taking place next week. I mean, it hasn't been formally announced, but it's supposed to take place on December 29th. I'm hoping, since he does get along with Netanyahu, but the question is now, I'm hoping that what they are cooking between them is something that even you and I don't know exactly what's happening, and that's good. I would rather something be going on behind the scenes that we don't know about that is extremely effective and have all the hype about peace busting out all over. I would rather have something going on behind the scenes, as we've seen before in joint operations. And so we'll see. We have to wait and see.
So we've discussed, Ruthie, we discussed what's on the table at Mar-a-Lago. We discussed Iran, we discussed Gaza, we discussed Syria, we discussed Lebanon. We didn't discuss Saudi Arabia, probably because we've run out of time. And secondly, no one seems to be discussing Saudi Arabia. There was a while ago that everyone thought that there was going to be a Trump-brokered breakthrough, the extension of the Abraham Accords and a peace treaty normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. No one seems to be talking about that. I'm worried. I'm worried that because the Saudis seem to have got everything they wanted from America without a normalization agreement with Israel, that their motivation for doing so has been lowered. Because if they can get their F-35s and their economic cooperation and their strategic defense understandings all in place without making peace with Israel, what's the motivation for them doing so? But let's not go into that now. I'm just worried, unless you're correct. You said something that's ultimately very optimistic, that we don't know what's really going on when the doors are closed. And so it will be an issue. But I wanted to finish off, with your permission, today's episode. You are in New York. You were there for the funeral of your father on Friday. You've been sitting Shiva, the Jewish way of mourning, in the week following the funeral. You've been receiving guests. It's been a difficult time for you. It's been a difficult time for your whole family. Your father was a great public intellectual, one of the great public intellectuals of the latter half of the 20th century, even in the beginning of this century. He died, he was close to 96, I believe. And your father, Norman Podhoretz, was an outstanding public intellectual, speaking out on all the issues, as you said at the beginning of today's episode. International relations, American internal policy. He was a lover of America and a lover of Israel. And I just thought we'd give you the last few minutes to talk about your father a little bit, Ruthie.
All right. Well, actually, you asked me before the broadcast if I would perhaps like to read aloud what Prime Minister Netanyahu asked me to read at my father's funeral. He crafted a sort of a statement, a short eulogy for my father. So I can do that, and that sums it up. Because talking about my father, it's hard. Yeah, he was a great public intellectual, but he and I, most of the things we talked about, I wouldn't be able to quote on the air because a lot of foul-mouthed language, a lot of very irreverent teasing. I mean, that's the relationship we had. And, it's sort of hard to, I would say, summarize it in a few words. But if you would like, I can read what Prime Minister Netanyahu said about him.
Please do, Ruthie.
All right. Now I need my glasses because I can't read this. Okay. This is from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Sarah and I were deeply saddened to learn of the passing of our dear friend Norman Podhoretz. Our friendship spanned nearly half a century. In every one of our meetings, I gleaned much from the founts of his wisdom, the depth of his conviction, and his wry wit. The legendary editor of Commentary magazine, Norman was a towering public intellectual who influenced millions with his seminal body of work. He and his late wife and partner, Midge Decter, advocated a firm stance against the totalitarian forces that threaten America, Israel, and all free societies. Norman was an American patriot. His love for the United States permeated all he said and did. Likewise, his devotion to the Jewish people in the state of Israel was unstinting, as was his belief in the indispensable alliance between America and Israel that guaranteed peace through strength. We send our deepest condolences to Ruthie, John, Naomi, and the entire Podhoretz family. So I thought that was very lovely, and I read it at the funeral, and that saved me from having to add to the eulogies, there were some really lovely eulogies. I could never have done justice the way those did. So I preferred to read Netanyahu's statement.
So, Ruthie, I can understand that. And I want to say once again that you have the sympathy and the support of me, and I think of all the people who watch our podcasts. We wish you strength. We wish you and your family long lives. And we look forward to seeing you here in Jerusalem next week when you'll be back in Israel at the end of your Shiva. And then we'll do another episode of Israel Diplomatic face-to-face. Until then, Ruthie, I wish you well.
Thank you so much, Mark. See you next week.